Her son gripped her wrist and said, "Stand back, you'll ruin the photos." Carolyn Merritt, founding investor and mother of the groom, didn't argue. Evan posed for wedding pictures under an arch she paid for wearing a boutonniere she pinned. By Monday, she would delete him from her business, her financials, and the trust he'd mistaken for weakness. She had raised him with quiet loyalty. Now she was answering that betrayal with ledgers, not lectures. And when the company unraveled, her silence would be the signature that ended it. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. His grip wasn't firm, but the message was. Carolyn barely registered the pressure around her wrist before her son's voice, low and clipped, cut through the murmur of laughter and clinking glasses. "Stand back," Evan said, not meeting her eyes. "You'll ruin the photos." For a beat, the whole garden seemed to hush, as if even the breeze had paused to listen. Then came the laughter, light, performative, a chorus from the bridesmaids like wind chimes hitting all the wrong notes. Sadie didn't laugh. She just smiled, a tight, rehearsed little smirk, then shifted her body so the photographer could get a better angle of her with Evan's parents, which apparently no longer included Carolyn. The camera shutter clicked. Carolyn stepped back. She let go of the hydrangea stem she'd been adjusting on the arch, careful not to let it fall. Her hands smelled of greenery and eucalyptus, the earthy perfume of hours spent making things beautiful. She had worn a navy dress, not flashy, just elegant, matching the early summer tones of the garden's soft pinks and sage. She'd ironed it herself that morning. She'd even brought an extra boutonniere in case Evan forgot one, which he had. It was now pinned to his lapel, proudly blooming in a picture she would not be part of. She retreated into the shadows just under the archway, where the light didn't quite reach. The chatter resumed, bubbly and oblivious. Glasses clinked. Music played low from the Bluetooth speaker Sadie insisted be hidden in the bushes so it wouldn't pollute the aesthetic. Behind a row of gold-rimmed folding chairs, Maya stood stiff, one hand clutching the strap of her mini camera bag. Her eyes were narrowed, lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But she was watching, and not the photographer. Carolyn didn't wave back. She just smoothed the edge of her sleeve and turned toward the side garden where the caterers were beginning to light the patio lanterns. The peonies she'd ordered her personal contribution lined every table. She doubted anyone would mention who had arranged them, who had paid for the florist when the budget unexpectedly tightened. That was always the language Sadie used. Tight, unfortunate, unavoidable. Yet here stood 3 bartenders, all in matching linen shirts and leather aprons, pouring custom-crafted elderflower spritzers into crystal coupes. The sun dropped lower behind the mountains. Golden hour light soaked the lawn. The guests raised glasses in a loose toast around the couple. Carolyn leaned on the wood rail just beyond the arch and stared out at the tall grass that bordered the property. The smell of garden roses mingled with grilled salmon from the chef's prep tent. "Do you want to get in one shot?" the photographer asked, eyes glancing at her without much warmth. He held the camera like a weapon aimed at legacy. "She's fine," Sadie said before Carolyn could answer. "Let's just do nuclear family." Carolyn said nothing. She didn't correct her. She didn't mention the check she'd written 5 years ago when Evan had a dream. No product and a second-hand blender. She didn't mention the handmade labels she'd printed herself for their first batch of supplements. Or the night Evan had called her shaking because their first supplier bailed, and she offered up her business line of credit without hesitation. Instead, she turned quietly and walked through the back gate, the gravel crunching under her low heels. Her shadow fell long over the path behind her. That night, the garden lay dark and perfectly groomed. In the quiet hum of her home office, Carolyn opened a binder labeled in her careful handwriting, "Personal Holdings." She flipped past the will, the property deeds, the documents she hadn't touched since her husband died. Then her fingers landed on the investment file, the one with the stitched green tab. Merit Brand Startup Investment. Amount? $312,000. Status: active. Name retained. on founding incorporation. She sat still, the overhead light buzzing faintly. Her fingers hovered above the page, not trembling, just precise. She reached for a pen, drew a check mark in the margin. No ceremony, no drama, just one small mark. But somewhere in Boulder, a foundation had quietly cracked. They framed their success. Carolyn framed the receipts. Not metaphorically, literally. 3 black binders sat on the oak dining table, lined edge to edge like quiet witnesses. On the wall above them hung a wedding canvas of Evan and Sadie, arms around each other, backlit by mountain fog and filtered ambition. Below that, Carolyn laid down the document that started it all. Merit Living, LLC, Articles of Incorporation. Her name, still crisp in Times New Roman, floated at the top of the page. Founding investor, Carolyn A. Merritt. Joan adjusted her glasses and gave a low whistle. You kept everything. I had to, Carolyn said. They thought I'd just fade into the background, but ink doesn't fade. Joan flipped the pages, pausing on wire transfers, equipment purchases, the storage unit lease, and the original supplier contract with her signature typed neatly at the bottom. Jesus, they're still using your tax ID for inventory shipping. They never filed the separation paperwork, Carolyn murmured. Evan said it was a formality, one he'd get around to. She leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, eyes locked on the folder like it might blink. Joan sat down with a grunt, the leather of the chair sighing beneath her. He assumed you were temporary, like seed money with a smile. He didn't account for memory. Carolyn's phone buzzed on the placemat beside her. A name flashed. Maya. Why weren't you in a single picture? Carolyn stared at the message for a second. The images from the garden flickered in her head. Evan's wrist tightening, Sadie's smirk, the photographer pivoting away like she'd never existed. Her fingers moved slowly. Because the part I built isn't meant to be seen until it's removed. Across the table, Joan was already scribbling on a legal pad. Here's the good news. The company's still partially in your name. Supplier accounts. Domain ownership, you could stop shipments with one phone call. I don't want to ruin them, Carolyn said evenly. Joan looked up, skeptical. You sure about that? Carolyn gave a small smile. I want them to undo themselves. I'll just be removing the safety net. The light outside was fading, shadow pouring across the mountain peaks. The room smelled faintly of lavender tea and toner ink. From the corner cabinet, Carolyn pulled out a leather folder thinner than the binders, but just as precise. Inside, a printed document with an embossed header, Marcus Landry, Estate Law and Consulting. She opened her phone, tapped out a short message. Ready to proceed with the clause we discussed. Then hit send. Joan glanced over. What clause? Carolyn's reply was quiet but firm. The one that releases them from my protection. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the reply came from Marcus. Let's begin with the dissolution packet. They called it clean living. Carolyn knew what it was scrubbed of. Scrubbed of origin. Scrubbed of names. Scrubbed of every late-night brainstorm at her kitchen table, every prototype printed on her dusty office printer, every check she signed without asking for a payback date. The scent of lemon oil and cardboard filled the room as Carolyn unpacked another shipment of Merit wellness merchandise. Laid out across her living room floor, like a museum of borrowed invention vitamins in soft-hued bottles, beeswax balms wrapped in muted craft labels, wellness journals stitched to mimic handmade. Every piece felt familiar because she had touched the first drafts, funded the first bulk order, branded the first run of those stupid chamomile-infused lip scrubs. Joan sat nearby, scanning printouts, red pen tapping against her lip. Look at this, she said, holding up a supplier agreement with a thin strip of blue ink underlining the account holder. C. Merritt. Carolyn's brows didn't lift. Still under my name? Joan nodded. You're the registered client for 3 of their 4 fulfillment partners. No one updated the back end. They just rebranded and assumed it would hold. It held because I never let go. She picked up one of the bottles and turned it over. Evan's new slogan read, From soil to soul, crafted by nature, guided by intuition. Nothing about equity. Nothing about foundation. Certainly nothing about the woman who once stood in line at the bank with his application and a $25,000 cashier's check. Carolyn moved to her computer. The screen glowed in the fading afternoon light. She opened the online supplier portals one at a time. Each login still recognized her username. Each inventory account still listed her as the point of contact. She didn't rush. She moved like a tailor threading a needle. Cancel contract. Revoke reorder authorization. Submit ownership conflict report. One at a time, like pulling thread from a sleeve, she undid what they'd never credited. An alert pinged on her phone. Sadie Merritt just posted a new reel. Carolyn clicked out of habit. The sound came first, ukulele chords, soft and cloying. Then Sadie's voice. "We've been so overwhelmed by the support lately. It just reminds us how important community is when you're building something meaningful from the ground up." Carolyn watched the smile, the faux vulnerability, the backdrop, a kitchen that Carolyn's line of credit refinanced after Evan insisted the tile cheapened their message. She rolled her eyes, almost amused. Then her phone vibrated again, Maya. "Tell me you saw that reel." Attached. Carolyn smiled faintly, then sent back just 2 words. "Watch closely." By Thursday morning, she stood under the corrugated tin awning of Merit Wellness's primary supplier warehouse, gray concrete, pine-dotted hills behind her. The air thick with the scent of wood pallets and hot asphalt. A clipboard clutched in one hand, a sealed envelope in the other. The clerk, a man in his 40s with sweat dampening the collar of his shirt, blinked as he read the document. "You're terminating account access for Merit Living?" "Correct. You're listed as the primary. I'm also the only one who ever made full payment on time." He opened the letter, eyes scanning the revocation form. "Well, this puts a freeze on all pending orders. They'll need to reapply under a new structure." Carolyn handed him a card. "And I'll need written confirmation of the hold. Today." As she stepped back into the sunlight, Joan's voice echoed in her memory from their last call. "They built a brand. You hold the stitches." Carolyn climbed into her car. Her fingers brushed over the dashboard like she was smoothing fabric. That evening, in a downtown Boulder co-working space lined with succulents and reclaimed wood, Evan's phone buzzed with a new message. Subject: Urgent manufacturing hold. Reason: Ownership clarification required. They marketed authenticity. Carolyn clicked unpublish. The cursor blinked once, twice, as if offering her one last out. She didn't take it. The dashboard on the Merit Wellness hosting panel still carried her name, Carolyn Merritt, founding admin. Somehow Evan had never changed it. Too sure she'd never log in again. Too confident she wouldn't know how. But this wasn't a digital rebellion. This was bookkeeping. Precision. A seam being ripped with calm fingers. The screen refreshed. The website flickered, then vanished. In its place, a plain message appeared against a soft cream background. Site under legal review. Please check back later. Merit Living, LLC. Carolyn didn't smile. She just shut the laptop with quiet finality and set it beside her armchair. The fire crackled nearby, pine wood popping as embers shifted. A mug of coffee sat cooling beside her, black. No sugar. Her fingers smelled faintly of the ink from the printed filings, now spread across the coffee table. Receipts. Contracts. Domain purchases. Supplier invoices. All in her name. All uploaded into one quietly organized Google Drive labeled Operational Corrections. At that very moment, across town, Sadie opened her laptop to chaos. Her inbox bloomed red bouncebacks, delivery errors, failed to connect to server messages. The email list she curated like a silk scarf, 20,000 subscribers, mostly women with mason jars and ring light shad, vanished. The automated newsletter, complete with morning mantras and discount codes, had evaporated into dead links and spam folders. She frantically refreshed the brand's homepage, only to see the bland, damning legal placeholder. The corner of her eye twitched. "Evan!" she yelled. From the other room, a tired voice. What? The site's down. Like, totally down. He wandered in barefoot, holding his phone. It's a glitch. I'll text Dan. It's not a glitch. It says legal review. Her tone dropped. Did you file the domain transfer after we talked? I thought you did. Sadie just stared at him, then turned her phone toward him, her influencer app dashboard, flatlined. No subscribers, no traffic, no open rates. Dead air. Maya's phone buzzed as she lay curled on her bed, headphones in, pencil tapping against a blank sketchbook page. Evan, Dad, is Grandma okay? Maya stared at the screen, then typed, She's working. A moment later, she added, You should probably stop pretending she doesn't know how to use Wi-Fi. Back at the house, Carolyn placed a small stack of documents into the scanner. Each sheet passed through with a soft mechanical court filings, supply invoices, trademark requests. Her fingers paused on the last one. A screenshot of Evan's most recent filing, an attempt to trademark her original sewing logo, the same one she'd drawn by hand 2 decades ago, the day she got her first bulk order for quilted baby blankets. She forwarded it to Marcus. 10 minutes later, his reply came with a file attached. Subject: Draft, cease, and desist. For unauthorized use of original design, Carolyn A. Merritt v. Merritt Living, LLC. She read the letter twice, then saved it to the same drive. The fire crackled louder as she leaned back, eyes scanning the framed black and white photo above the mantel, her in her first studio, hair pulled into a tight bun, surrounded by bolts of cotton, measuring tape around her neck. She hadn't touched that photo in years, but tonight, it looked back at her with something like permission. At 11:12 p.m., Carolyn received a message from a longtime retail partner, a woman who had carried Merritt Living products in her boutique since the early days. The message was short, a screenshot, and one sentence. Did Evan just say he never had financial help? There he was in a podcast snippet, smiling, polished, voice smooth. We built this thing from nothing. No loans, no outside capital, just grit and vision. Carolyn stared at the screen. Her hand didn't shake. Her jaw didn't clench. She simply clicked Save Video. They told a version of the story. Carolyn withheld the rights to tell it. The email from Thrivewell magazine sat open on her screen, its tone airy and admiring, like a well-rehearsed pat on the head. Hi, Carolyn. We're featuring Evan and Sadie Merritt in our July Visionary Creators issue. Would love to include a few words about his early inspiration, perhaps a quote from Mom? Mom. Not investor, not founder, not owner. Carolyn didn't answer right away. She stood up, the hardwood cool beneath her bare feet, and moved to the back window where the early morning sun turned the mountains pale gold. There was a stack of files already waiting on the breakfast bar Joan had dropped them off last night, clipped, color-coded, and unavoidable. She walked back to her laptop, sat down slowly, and opened a clean draft. Dear editorial team, while I appreciate your interest in profiling Merritt Wellness, I must inform you of significant legal inaccuracies in the narrative provided by your subjects. Attached, please find documents confirming my role as founding investor, brand developer, and financial guarantor of the company now trading under that name. Additionally, the rights to the original logo, slogan, and packaging remain contested and are under active review. Please also note, my authorization to use my likeness, name, or associated family imagery has not been granted. I respectfully request a full editorial review before publication. Regards, Carolyn A. Merritt. She attached the folder Marcus had labeled Ownership Verification over 50 pages of timelines, contracts, check stubs, and notarized agreements. Then she clicked Send. It took 2 days for the fallout to begin. Not with a bang, but with a quiet change to Thrivewell's homepage. The promo image of Evan and Sadie, him holding a recycled glass jar, her smiling in sun-kissed linen, disappeared without announcement. Later that night, The publication issued a statement, hidden in a sidebar. Correction. A previously scheduled feature has been removed due to unresolved legal concerns regarding the subject's business origins and intellectual property. We regret the oversight. In their Boulder home, Evan paced across the polished concrete floor while Sadie sat stone, still on the couch, face pale and jaw locked. The silence felt sharp, broken only by the occasional ding of a phone receiving rejections from brand partners and confused influencers. "She did this," Sadie whispered. "Your mother torpedoed us." Evan ran a hand through his hair. "She's bluffing. She doesn't want attention." "Are you kidding? This is war, quiet war." "But still." He stopped moving. "What do we do?" Sadie opened her phone and began typing furiously. That night, a new video appeared on their brand's Instagram account. The lighting was soft, faux casual. Evan wore a gray Henley, sleeves pushed up. Sadie sat close beside him, the embodiment of curated vulnerability. "Hey friends," Evan began. "We just wanted to clarify a few things." "About our journey," Sadie cut in. "Because we believe in transparency. We've had support along the way, like many small businesses." Evan nodded, solemn. "But ultimately, merit living is our vision, and we've worked incredibly hard to shape it into what it is today." Carolyn watched from her kitchen table, the soft light of the range hood casting long shadows on the oak. She didn't flinch, didn't pause, just clicked, download. The video joined the others in a folder titled, Revisionist History, Uncut. Later, on speakerphone, Joan let out a low whistle. "You didn't yell," she said. "You just unplugged the mic." Carolyn was sewing again, hands busy with a quilt square, needle gliding silently. "They wanted a platform," she said. "I built it. Now I'm disassembling it." Outside, the wind moved through the pines like a warning no one else could hear. At 9:03 p.m., Marcus's email arrived. Subject line, Action item, Dissolution. "Carolyn, it's time to dissolve your investment and remove your backing entirely. I'll initiate the full withdrawal process and prepare the equity recovery clause for enforcement. Let me know if you'd like to proceed tonight." Carolyn read the email twice, then reached for her pen and underlined the final sentence. "Let me know if you'd like to proceed tonight." She clicked reply. Begin. They forgot whose name opened the accounts. Carolyn reminded the bank with precision, not anger. Inside the polished walls of First Alpine Credit Union, Marcus sat beside her, briefcase cracked open like a surgical tray. The banker across the desk, a woman in her early 40s, with French-tipped nails and a Boulder wellness sticker on her laptop fad, just finished reading the notarized ownership exit form. She blinked, twice, as the weight of what Carolyn was executing settled in. "Are you sure you want to do this?" the banker asked carefully. Carolyn folded her hands. "I'm not withdrawing. I'm recovering." Her voice was calm. Even her cardigan was calm soft gray, pearl-buttoned, the kind you couldn't wrinkle if you tried. Marcus slid a second document forward. Section 7B of the operating agreement stipulates full capital return with compounding interest in the event of unilateral dissolution by the founding investor. The banker skimmed it, lips parting slightly. "This is enforceable." "Fully," Marcus confirmed. The woman turned back to her computer. Keystrokes echoed through the office like rain on a glass roof. Carolyn watched the process with the serenity of someone who had waited long enough. She didn't fidget. Didn't blink. A few minutes later, the banker leaned back and gave a slow nod. "Funds will be released today. Transferring to your personal business account now." Carolyn signed the confirmation page, her pen gliding without hesitation. "Transfer complete. $312,408.7 The screen pulsed green. Carolyn didn't smile. On the other side of town, Evan's phone buzzed in the middle of a branding call with a potential investor. He glanced down, saw the notification, and froze mid-sentence. Alert. Merit living business. Account balance below minimum. Operating threshold. His voice cracked. "Sorry, Just a sick technical thing, he muttered, waving off the Zoom camera. Then another alert. Outgoing transfer. Authorized capital withdrawal. Carolyn A. Merritt. He stood so fast he knocked over his chair. Sadie! He shouted. She pulled the funds, all of them! Sadie rushed in, hair up, half a smoothie in her hand. What are you talking about? He shoved the phone toward her. She dissolved her steak. Took everything. Sadie stared at the screen, then back at him. This will destroy everything. Carolyn's reply came later, over the phone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't waste words. That's not what I funded, she said quietly, then hung up. By late afternoon, Joan arrived at Carolyn's place with a portable scanner and 2 coffees. Tax forms are ready, she said, towing off her shoes at the door. We're closing Q4 under your name, not theirs. Carolyn nodded. Any word from their CPA? Joan snorted. They're probably still Googling equity clawback. She pulled out the laptop, connected to the Wi-Fi, and within minutes filed the final earnings report for the year. No shared profits. No ambiguous footnotes. Just Carolyn's name, back where it had always belonged. As they worked, Maya peeked in, school bag slung over one shoulder. Did you just end their company? She asked, blinking. Carolyn looked up, her face unreadable. No, she said. I just stopped sewing the parachute. Later that night, Carolyn stood at her desk, a pen in one hand and a single-page form in the other. Marcus had pre-filled it. UCC financing statement filing of lien. Collateral. Inventory, trademarks, packaging, and associated IP of Merit Living, LLC. She signed at the bottom, then sealed it in a FedEx envelope. The weight of it wasn't heavy, not like vengeance, more like truth, mailed with tracking. They sent a holiday card. Carolyn returned it with a statement of ownership. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, hand-addressed in Sadie's looping script. A gold wax seal pressed with the Merit Living logo shimmered under the porch light, and embossed leaf wrapped around an M. The very same design Carolyn had sketched on a napkin during Evan's second failed pitch meeting. She opened it with a letter opener, not carefully. Inside, a trifold invitation to the first annual Family Brand Gratitude Dinner, held at the property Carolyn had helped refinance. RSVP card tucked neatly behind the embossed cardstock, alongside a printed disclaimer. Participation is contingent upon agreement to non-disparagement guidelines. Her eyes lingered on the line. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a muzzle. By noon, the envelope was back in the mail. Not with the RSVP, but with the notarized letter drafted by Marcus and stamped in blue ink. Notice of revocation of home equity access authorization. Effective immediately. Issued by Carolyn A. Merritt, sole title holder. The same home Evan had leveraged quietly, confidently as part of their line of credit expansion when things got tight. Carolyn had signed. Off once, years ago, when they'd promised the brand needed just one more season to stabilize. No more. She sealed the letter in a plain envelope. No wax, no sentiment. Joan called later that day, having already heard from Marcus. You gave them grace, she said. They built entitlement with it. They mistook quiet for permission, Carolyn said. That evening, Evan called, just one ring before voicemail kicked in. He didn't leave a message. Carolyn watched the screen flash and fade. She didn't call back. Later, as the sun dipped below the ridgeline and the scent of wood smoke drifted in from the neighbor's chimney, Maya let herself in through the back door. She said nothing, just walked over to Carolyn in the kitchen, arms full of her backpack and art supplies, and hugged her tightly. Carolyn didn't ask why. She just hugged her back, one hand resting on Maya's crown like she used to when she was little. The girl hadn't said much since the wedding weekend, but her presence was steady, like gravity. They stood there in silence, surrounded by the hum of the fridge, the quiet click of the heating pipes, and a world that, for once, didn't need explaining. After Maya had gone to bed, Carolyn sat down at her printer, opened her phone, and scrolled to a single, old message. One she hadn't deleted, though she'd read it 100 times. Without your backing, we're nothing. Evan. She printed it, centered on the page. No timestamp, no sender info. Just the words. She folded it once, pressed it into a clear sleeve, and filed it behind the dissolution documents in her drawer. The next morning, Carolyn opened Instagram while sipping her coffee. Something was off. The search came up empty. At Merit Living, user not found. She refreshed, checked from another account. Nothing. The entire page photos, reels, follower count, even Sadie's heavily curated story shad vanished. Overnight. No error message, no transition post. Just gone. Like a storefront papered over after a bankruptcy no one wanted to announce. She stared at the screen. Then looked out the window, where frost coated the edges of the glass and the pines stood silent and unshaken. They sold out once. Then they just ran out. Carolyn's phone buzzed before sunrise. A soft chime, the kind she assigned to business contacts, not emergencies, but indicators of shift. She slid on her glasses, tapped the screen, and saw the name, Lila Archer, owner, Grove Market Company. Hi, Carolyn. Hate to bother, but we've had to pull all Merit Living products from the shelves. Distributors say orders are locked due to a dispute in registered ownership. Do you know what's going on? She did, but she let the message sit for a moment, like a cooling tea bag. Then she walked to the window. Boulder was quiet. A thin veil of mist sat low across the foothills, morning light just beginning to thread between the pines. Carolyn replied with a single sentence. Yes, that would be the lien enforcement in action. By mid-morning, the messages multiplied. 3 boutique retailers, 2 online eco-platforms, a regional buyer for a Colorado co-op chain. All reporting the same error. Fulfillment blocked, accounts on hold. No one from Merit Living returning emails. Joan arrived just before lunch, wearing aviator sunglasses and holding a cinnamon raisin bagel in one hand and a folder in the other. I confirmed the lien's been processed, she said, sliding the paperwork across the table. They can't legally sell, repackage, or relabel inventory without clearing it through you. Carolyn glanced at the document. Her signature, small and steady, stared back. They could pivot if they had capital, Joan added, but I imagine the investor pool's dried up. Carolyn nodded. They weren't selling values. They were selling a veneer. It peels. Joan smirked, took a bite of her bagel, and leaned back in her chair. If Sadie doesn't scream into a ring light by Friday, I'll be shocked. That afternoon, Carolyn pulled open the door to her old sewing room. Dust floated in the filtered sunlight, dancing through slanted rays like forgotten thread. The space smelled faintly of cedar from the baseboards, and the air still carried the ghost of starch and old fabric bolts. She'd cleared the room years ago, repurposed it as a storage space when Merit Living had scaled up and needed a temporary HQ, but the folding table was still there, tucked beneath a cotton sheet. Her iron still stood in the corner, and on the highest shelf sat the box of her original product, tags hand-inked, each one unique. She exhaled, then began. Within hours, the sheet was folded, the table scrubbed clean, and her quilting machine reassembled with Maya's help. We could bring in 2 apprentices at a time, Maya said, measuring the space with her eyes. There's enough room for lessons, especially if we mount a wall mirror. Carolyn nodded. They don't need to know the whole story, just how to build something honest. That night, the 2 of them sat cross-legged on the floor, laptops open, wireframes sketched across graph paper. Maya clicked through font options. Carolyn dictated quietly. Merit by hand. Maya paused. Tagline? Carolyn didn't hesitate. Legacy without lies. By morning, Sadie had deleted every trace of the brand from her bio. No more links, no curated highlights, just a cryptic quote about transformation and refocusing energy. Joan spotted it and sent a screenshot with a caption. Even the influencers are surrendering. Carolyn didn't respond. She was in the sewing room, organizing bolts of muslin humming softly. Maya leaned in from the doorway. You don't miss it? The spotlight? Carolyn snipped a loose thread, eyes steady. I don't need a spotlight, she said. Just a clean seam. That evening, just after dinner, Marcus called. His voice was level but tinged with edge. They've hired a lawyer, he said, and they're calling this brand sabotage. Carolyn didn't miss a beat. Then they finally realized it's gone. They tried to sue her with a story. Carolyn countered with documentation. The manila folders stacked on her dining table didn't look like power, but page by page, line by line, they were. Marcus sat at the far end, sleeves rolled, his glasses pushed slightly down his nose. He didn't speak much, just sorted, clipped, and nodded at key intervals. Over 200 pages assembled in quiet precision. Wire transfers, email chains, product label drafts in Carolyn's handwriting, dated screenshots of supplier orders with her login credentials. Even an early invoice where Sadie had requested urgent restocking credit while signing her name above Carolyn's printed one. Everything they forgot to erase, Marcus murmured. Carolyn didn't answer. She was focused, her eyes sharp behind silver-framed readers. She didn't need to narrate what had happened. That was Evan and Sadie's method overshare and obscure. Her weapon was silence, bound by staples and truth. The counterclaim went out by courier and email the same day the summons arrived. 2 days later, Sadie's lawyer withdrew. Official reason: conflict of interest. Unofficially? Likely saw the paperwork and backed away like the building was on fire. Joan texted a screenshot of the withdrawal notice with a single-word caption. Oops. Carolyn didn't smile. She didn't need to. The knock on her door came just after dusk. Not tentative, not aggressive, just enough to say, I still think I'm entitled to a response. Carolyn opened it slowly. Evan stood on the porch, wearing a zip-up fleece he hadn't paid for, hair rumpled like he was playing stressed CEO for someone who might care. He looked at her, and for a moment, she saw her son, the little boy who once sat under her sewing table, pulling thread between his fingers like it was magic. Then he spoke. This is going to ruin us. Carolyn said nothing. He rubbed his face, voice dropping. You could have just called me. You didn't have to. He gestured in the vague direction of downtown. All this. She stepped away for a moment and returned with a frame wrapped in craft paper. She held it out. He didn't take it. She didn't wait for him to. She pressed it into his hands. I kept the first invoice, she said quietly. You signed it. You promised repayment when things stabilized. You called it partnership. He looked down. Through the glass, the words stared back-typed, dated, initialed by them both. His mouth opened, then closed. Carolyn stepped back. She didn't slam the door. She just shut it, the latch clicking like punctuation. Inside, Joan sat on the couch, sipping a cup of her too-strong herbal tea. That wasn't bitterness, she said after a beat. That was an audit. Carolyn sat beside her, folded her hands over her knee. Bitterness would have been showing up to their launch party in a velvet robe. Joan laughed, then sighed. You just handed them the mirror. Whether they look, not your problem. Maya had been quiet all night, editing audio clips in the guest bedroom. Around midnight, she posted a new episode of her fledgling podcast, Unthreaded, Conversations We've Been Told Not to Have. This one was titled, When Credit Becomes Inheritance and When It's Denied. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. She played Evan's old quote, We built this from the ground up. Then laid it against Carolyn's original email, read aloud in her own voice. Enclosed is the bank authorization form for your supplier contract. Let me know when you need the EIN. Listeners would hear it for what it was. Not vengeance. Just math. The following morning, a letter arrived. Heavy cardstock, hand-addressed. Carolyn opened it slowly, expecting some new maneuver, another carefully worded plea. But inside was a formal invitation from the Boulder Women's Business Incubator. We would be honored to offer you a mentorship position as part of our Legacy Builder initiative. Your quiet leadership and financial clarity have become a case study among our advisors. Let us know if you're interested in helping shape the next generation. Carolyn set the card down, fingertips brushing the raised ink. This wasn't a step forward. It was a platform, one she built, quietly, under their feet. They left their version everywhere. Carolyn repainted hers carefully, deliberately, without apology. It started with the plaques. The first one came down with a click as she slid her thumbnail under the hookah black and gold entrepreneur spotlight from a local magazine, with Evan and Sadie's names engraved beneath a tagline Carolyn had written. Rooted in clean, grown with grit. Her eyes lingered on it for half a second before she dropped it into the cardboard box beside her. No hesitation. No regret. Just muscle memory and a quiet decision that had been simmering for too long. By noon, the walls of her home office, once a shared space, filled with branded photos and framed press clippings, stood bare. Naked drywall. A faint outline of sunlight where the image of Evan shaking hands with a venture capitalist used to hang. She wrote the label on the side of the box in a slow, looping script. For the delusional archive. Then sealed it shut with brown tape. Joan arrived 20 minutes later, holding a white plastic bag like it was precious cargo. She didn't knock, just let herself in, as she always had. I brought something, she said. Felt like you needed a new centerpiece. She pulled out a sleek rectangular sign made of brushed steel and oak, laser-etched in clean serif font. Built by Carolyn, backed by reality. Carolyn stared at it for a long beat, then smiled and nodded toward the freshly cleared wall above the mantel. Hang it dead center. Joan grinned. With a level or with spite? Both. That afternoon, Maya appeared at the door with a rolled bundle wrapped in linen and tied with twine. I found something in your closet, she said, stepping inside, cheeks slightly pink. It was behind the winter coats. Thought you'd forgotten it. Carolyn opened it on the floor. A quilt unfinished, but breathtaking. Deep burgundy against cream. Patterns of interlocking rings and stitched feathers. Hand-embroidered quotes tucked subtly in the corners. I was going to gift it to them, Carolyn said softly. When the business turned its first real profit. Maya knelt beside her. They wouldn't have seen it. They never saw anything that wasn't on camera. Then let's hang it here, right where people can. They did, centered across the main office wall. Carolyn stood back as Maya smoothed one corner, anchoring it with brass pins. The room had changed. Not just aesthetically, it had new gravity now. By early evening, the office buzzed with soft chatter, the smell of tea and printer ink mingling in the air. Carolyn's first mentorship circle had arrived. 4 young women, notebooks open, questions ready, nerves masked with ambition. Some of them still in college, some already hustling side gigs. All of them looking for truth in a world stuffed with filters. Carolyn didn't give a speech. She just sat at the head of the table and listened, then spoke plainly. You don't need to be louder, she said. You just need to be rooted. Don't let anyone trademark your clarity. They nodded like they understood, or at least wanted to. Later, when the house was quiet again, Carolyn checked her inbox. Among receipts and appointment reminders, one message stood out. From Marcus Landry. Subject: Status update. No further legal threats received. Consider the matter closed unless advised otherwise. Carolyn leaned back in her chair. Outside, the night was velvet black. The room was still. Everything felt still finally. Then her phone buzzed on the desk. Evan. Just a text. You made your point. She stared at the screen, unreadable. Then clicked lock. She wasn't in the photo either, but she saw the whole picture. Maya stood in the doorway of Carolyn's kitchen, backpack slung low, curls loose and damp from the snow. She didn't take her coat off right away. She just watched Carolyn slice carrots, the steady rhythm of the knife loud in the quiet house. Did you ever love them less? Maya asked softly. After what they did. Carolyn paused, not because the question startled her, but because it didn't. She wiped her hands on a linen towel and turned to face her granddaughter fully. No, she said. I just stopped giving them more than they returned. Maya stepped inside, slow and uncertain. She was taller now, nearly eye to eye. But her voice still held that searching edge, like she was trying to find a version of the world she could live in. "That sounds fair," she murmured, like it surprised her. "It's not about fairness," Carolyn said, motioning toward the counter. "It's about balance." They chopped together for a while. Onions, garlic, rosemary from the potted window box. The warmth of the oven filled the air with soft, savory heat. A stew bubbled on the back burner, scenting the room with thyme and quiet, forgiveness. Then Maya pulled her phone from her pocket. "Can I film this? Just for your site? Maybe for a reel? You don't have to say anything." Carolyn raised an eyebrow. "You're filming a 70-year-old woman chopping onions?" "You're a 70-year-old woman who erased a brand, launched a new one, and stitched the landing," Maya said. "People eat that up." Carolyn smiled. "You mean people need to see what resolve looks like without lipstick?" "Exactly." Maya propped her phone on a mason jar and adjusted the angle. The camera caught Carolyn in profile-focused, precise, present. She didn't pose. She just worked. Later, while the stew simmered and the sourdough warmed in the oven, they sat at the dining table with mugs of teen cinnamon. One plain blackened the winter afternoon slanted light through the window blinds like soft stripes across the floor. Carolyn exhaled, slow. "You know," she said, "my first business failed before it even opened." Maya blinked. "What?" "I was 23, rented a booth in a flea market, paid for the signage, ordered fabric, and the whole place burned down 2 nights before launch. Electrical fire." Maya stared at her. "I didn't have insurance," Carolyn added. "I cried in the parking lot, then borrowed money from a woman I barely knew to try again. I never told your father. He always thought I just got it right on the first try." Maya swallowed. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because no one asked." Silence fell like a blanket. Then Maya leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "I want to build with people, not on people," she said. "Like, if I ever make something real, I don't want to forget who handed me the hammer." Carolyn studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. Then she rose without a word, walked to the hall closet, and returned with 2 things: a worn leather sewing kit, soft from years of use, and a small digital camera in its original box, dust still clinging to the corners. "These are yours," she said, placing them in front of Maya. "One teaches patience, the other, perspective." Maya touched both gently, reverently. "I don't know what to say." "Say thank you, and mean it." Maya did. The next day, Carolyn opened her email and blinked at the subject line. "Invitation. Speak at Summit High's Entrepreneur Week. We would love for you to share your story with the students." Her cursor hovered over reply. "They said I'd ruin the photos. Instead, I stood under the lights." The gymnasium didn't smell like victory, it smelled like bleach, metal chairs, and middle school anxiety. But to Carolyn, the air felt cleaner than any stage she'd never been offered. Folded programs sat in neat stacks near the door, and the projector hummed overhead. On the banner above the risers, block letters read, "Entrepreneur Week, building from the ground up." She waited off stage behind a navy curtain, hands clasped loosely, not shaking. Her name had been listed 4th in the program. Fourth-hand final. The last word. She watched a young man in a tech startup hoodie wrap up a pitch about a compostable phone case. He bowed slightly to awkward applause, then hustled off stage, past her. "They're all yours," he whispered, eyes wide. "Tough crowd." Carolyn smiled. "I've handled tougher." When she stepped up to the microphone, the lights hit her like a warmth she hadn't realized she missed. Not blinding, not theatrical, just present. She scanned the room. Rows of high school students, teachers, a few local business owners in collared shirts. And near the front, Maya sitting straight, face composed but eyes glistening. Carolyn adjusted the mic. "I'm not going to tell you how to build an empire," she began, "but I will tell you how not to disappear inside one." A hush fell. Phones dropped. Heads tilted forward. She told them about her first failure. about starting a business from a single borrowed machine, about taking risks without guarantees and believing in someone who eventually rebranded her out of existence. She never said names. She didn't need to. "I funded something," she said, "and watched it walk away without looking back. It didn't break me, but it taught me." She paused. The auditorium was still. Don't let someone make you invisible just because they can't say thank you. That was when Maya covered her mouth with her hand, and the applause came out loud but real. A few kids stood. Maya didn't clap. She wiped her cheek instead. Later that evening, back at her studio, Joan was already waiting with a wide black frame. "You're going to act like I didn't transcribe the whole damn thing," she said. "It's laminated, and I printed it in Baskerville because you deserve elegance." She unwrapped the frame and held it up. Carolyn read the title, "Don't Let Someone Make You Invisible," and looked away for just a moment, pretending to find a spot on the wall. Joan noticed. Didn't comment. Just grabbed the step stool. 2 days later, her inbox bloomed with unfamiliar names. One from the Boulder Creative Fund, another from a Colorado Women's Finance Co-op, a third from a national mentorship initiative asking if she'd consider co-founding a local apprenticeship model based on merit by hand. Each offered partnership, funding, collaboration. Carolyn didn't rush to reply. She read them slowly, highlighted a few lines, then placed them in a folder labeled Build Forward. That evening, Marcus emailed her a simple update. Subject: Merit Case File. Body: Status: Resolved. She leaned back in her chair, fingers resting on the desk, and for the first time in a long while breathed without weight. That night, after she'd locked the studio, she found a pale blue envelope tucked between her storm door and the screen. Handwritten. Slanted script she recognized before she even turned it over. No return address. Inside, a folded note card. "Dinner sometime? Just us?" N. She stared at the message. Not angry. Not moved. Just quiet. She placed it back in the envelope, unopened, then slid it into the drawer marked, "For when silence speaks loudest." He finally used a pen. Carolyn didn't need the ink. The envelope sat on her entryway table for 3 days. Untouched but undeniably Przensky blue stationery. Her name in Evan's looping script, the kind he used back in high school when trying to impress English teachers. It wasn't heavy, just thick enough to feel intentional, weighted with some version of apology or confession or strategy disguised as sincerity. She didn't know which. She didn't care enough to find out. Each morning she walked past it with her coffee. Each night it remained silent, unclaimed, like a misplaced artifact from a version of motherhood she no longer subscribed to. On the 4th day, she picked it up. Not to open it, to file it. She walked to her office, pulled open a drawer, and created a new folder with her label maker. Words that came too late. The envelope slid in without resistance. No ceremony. Just a quiet acknowledgement. This was not her story anymore to salvage, soothe, or translate. Joan called that afternoon, voice sharp as ever. "So, did you read his epiphany? On paper?" "No," Carolyn said. "It can stay sealed." Joan gave a dry laugh. "Closure's not a conversation. Sometimes it's a boundary." "Exactly." A pause. "You sound different." "Lighter?" "No," Joan said. "Definite." Carolyn spent the next morning at Marcus's office, seated at the long walnut conference table with 2 cups of tea, a notary present, and the final draft of her living trust before her. She read every word, twice. Her signature landed with unflinching clarity. 100% of her estate home, accounts, creative rights, and all remaining assets would fund future creators. No direct inheritance for Evan. No generational wealth extended without generational respect. The trust would be distributed through a mentorship-based nonprofit to help young entrepreneurs, particularly women, start what no one else saw in them. Marcus slid the document into a crimson folder and sealed it. "Any objections?" "Not a one." He nodded. "Then it's done." That evening, back home, she sat by the fireplace with a brass wax stamp in one hand and a letter in the other. The contents were simple: a cover letter, her official trust summary, and a single line typed in bold at the top. "This is not a punishment. It's a correction." She folded it precisely, pressed a deep red wax seal into the back of the envelope, and addressed it to her attorney's office for public record. Not sent to Evan, not offered as a threat, just archived. As the snow began to drift again outside the windows, Maya stepped inside with the smell of wind and winter clinging to her hoodie. She dropped her bag by the bench and glanced at Carolyn's face, studying her. "You've looked lighter lately." Carolyn raised her eyebrows. "Lighter?" Maya nodded. "Like you're not holding it anymore." Carolyn considered that, then smiled. "Maybe I handed it off." Maya looked down at the sealed envelope resting on the hall table. "Is that from him?" "It is. Are you going to read it?" "Number." Maya didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Instead, she curled into the chair across from Carolyn, pulled her sketchbook from her backpack, and began to draw in silence thick, confident strokes that filled the room with an unspoken rhythm. That night, Carolyn opened her laptop to a new email subject line: "Publishing interest, threadbare." Inside was a contract from a mid-sized independent press, offering full editorial support, national distribution, and a generous advance. The title was already set: Threadbare. What They Took Until I Stopped Giving. She stared at the screen, breath caught somewhere between laughter and disbelief. Then she clicked sign. Not revenge. Not even resolution. Legacy. They told me I'd ruin the picture. I made a better one. The photo arrived in a thick envelope, glossy, warm-toned, captured on a chilly Sunday morning in Carolyn's studio. She opened it slowly, careful not to smudge the print. The image nearly vibrated with quiet power. She stood in the center, arms gently crossed, flanked by Maya, Joan, and 4 young women from her first mentorship circle. Each woman wore something they had made by hand: a scarf, a stitched pin, a canvas apron woven not just from fabric, but from instruction, trust, and effort that couldn't be borrowed or branded. Carolyn studied it for a long while. No one was posed. Everyone was standing fully in their own frame. She slipped it into a walnut frame, brushed the glass with a microfiber cloth, then walked to the hallway. Evan's wedding portrait had hung there for nearly 5 years. Flushed smiles, vineyard tones, all soft filters and curated love. She took it down without hesitation. It left behind 2 pinholes in the wall. She didn't patch them, just hung the new photo over the old ghosts. Joan showed up that afternoon, eyes catching the frame mid-step. She paused, then grinned. Now that's a merit line worth preserving. Downstairs, Maya tapped away on her laptop, headphones looped around her neck, voice just above a whisper as she recorded the intro for her latest video. "Welcome to Built with Grandma, short series about legacy, labor, and the kind of success you don't have to shout about." She cut in footage from that morning. Carolyn showing a student how to reinforce a seam, laughter echoing under soft piano music, sunlight pouring over bolts of fabric and loose spools. Maya edited late into the night, posting the first video just after midnight. The caption was short: "Before they told their version, she lived the real one." By morning, it had 18,000 views. Meanwhile, Sadie tried one last thing. She reposted a reel from over a year ago, her and Evan smiling on a mountain trail, overlay text reading, "We built this from nothing, and we're still building." The algorithm gave it a half-hearted push. A few likes trickled in, a comment or two. Then silence. No traction, no shares, no fresh adoration. Just the sound of an audience that had moved on. Carolyn didn't comment. She didn't even look twice. Her presence wasn't reactive, it was rooted. She had no need to perform clarity for people who no longer deserved her attention. Instead, she updated her website bio. The new line sat alone, bold and unapologetic. Still standing, no tag needed. That afternoon, a cream-colored envelope arrived in her mailbox. Official seal from the Colorado Creative Commerce Council. She opened it with steady fingers, skimmed the contents once, then again, slower. Nomination: 2025 State Creative Entrepreneurship Award. Category: Legacy through Innovation. Status: Finalist. She stood in the entryway, the sunlight filtering through the transom window, holding a recognition she never asked for because it wasn't about being seen. It was about building something that stayed upright after everyone else tried to walk off with the foundation. In the background, the hallway photo caught the light just right, casting a soft glow across the floor. And this time, when someone looked at it, they wouldn't see a woman standing off to the side. They'd see her exactly where she belonged. They asked me to stand back, so I stood taller. Carolyn's hands moved slowly, precisely, as they had for decades needle to cloth, thread pulled taut, then knotted with intention. The final square of the final quilt lay across her lap like a closing chapter. Navy, linen, plum. Each panel held a word embroidered in fine, looping thread, stitched in the same hand that once signed loan documents, folded invoices, and cradled unspoken sacrifices. Respect. Boundaries. Legacy. The stitches weren't perfect. That was the point. They held anyway. Maya stood behind her, phone in one hand, filming without saying a word. She knew not to interrupt the rhythm. She knew what this quilt meant, not just as fabric, but as the visible record of every invisible thing. When the last thread was tied, Carolyn set the needle down and ran her palm across the finished edge. The fabric was warm from her touch, the letters standing like quiet sentinels against the cloth. "That's it," she said. "No edits." A week later, the studio was glowing. The front window bore a sign in gold hand lettering: "A Threaded Truth. The work of Carolyn Merritt." Inside, quilts hung from floating wooden beams and industrial racks, each one spotlit and labeled not with price tags, but with one-word titles: loss, endurance, correction, belief. A soft hum of conversation filled the room. Local press, former clients, mentees, curious neighbors, even the skeptical women from Evan and Sadie's old circles, now quietly admiring the craftsmanship they'd once disregarded. Maya stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, checking RSVPs and guiding guests toward cider and hand-poured coffee. She wore a custom apron they'd sewn together the week before. On the pocket, built with Grandma. Carolyn stood near the back, wearing a dark green dress and no name tag. She didn't need one. An older woman, gray braid over one shoulder, approached the display at the far wall. She ran her fingers just over the fabric of boundaries, careful not to touch. "This piece," the woman said softly, "it doesn't scream." Carolyn nodded. "Number? It just doesn't flinch." The woman smiled. "You built something they can't steal." Carolyn tilted her head slightly. "Because I stopped sewing for people who cut the fabric while I wasn't looking." The woman's eyes crinkled. "That'll stick with me." As the sun dipped behind the ridge and gold turned to lavender across the sky, the guests began to leave. They shuffled slowly, stopping to take last glances, to shake Carolyn's hand, to ask quiet questions about meaning, technique, forgiveness. Joan gave a short wave from the parking lot as she backed her car out. "You stitched the ending," she'd said earlier, "and it's stronger than their whole facade ever was." Carolyn locked the front door behind the last guest and turned off the overhead lights. The studio fell into soft shadow, still warm with presence. Maya walked up beside her and slipped the keys into her pocket. "Feels like a closing night," she whispered. "No," Carolyn said. "Feels like a foundation." On the inside of the door, etched in frosted glass, a new line now glowed under the studio light. Carolyn Merritt owner. Maker, matriarch. Maya stood still, eyes on the words, then turned toward her grandmother. "You know," she said, "they posed for the picture." Carolyn smiled small, but complete. "I kept the pattern,"